called the Halpin Protocol, and the three tenets are as follows, and it is really the absolute kernel of the campaign. 1, does the patient suffer from life-threatening illnesses to which there is currently no sufficient medical treatment? Number 2, does the patient give informed consent to the modification of his/her legal remedies against the developer of the drug and against those conducting the clinical trials? And number 3, has the developer undertaken that A, the clinical trials will be conducted in a properly controlled environment and under medical supervision, and B, the results of the clinical trials will be published, whatever the results.
So I think the Halpin Protocol again speaks to empowering patients and increasing access to new therapies and lightening the regulatory burden around new therapies. And it says very importantly that the regulatory burden should be a reflection of the clinical need.
We've sat and debated today exactly what Leslie's trying to do, and it's very similar to what I've been trying to do for the last 5 years. I was diagnosed with an illness which, if the transplant didn't work, that was it, no other option. But only a year later, my particular illness, there was a clinical trial that was fast-tracked to the UK. And a good friend of mine now, he's survived because of that clinical trial. And that is an example of the sort of work that we aim and we are doing. We're investing in a structure that allows all this science to come out and benefit patients that don't have the options that a few of us do have.
Well, we've seen over recent decades the pharmaceutical industry invest more and more in the search for new drugs. We've seen stunning breakthroughs in genetics and a whole series of related technologies, and yet the pharmaceutical industry's rate of productivity of new drugs has fallen.
I think it's very important to recognise when talking about the biopharmaceutical companies that I represent that what has occurred over the course of recent years is a greater externalisation in terms of their approach to research. Now, what that has led to, of course, is different approaches to intellectual property, greater challenges around legality and those sort of issues themselves. That has led to if you like, a plethora of new discoveries coming through and entering into the discovery and development process themselves.
You heard today Les Halpin saying that for patients who have a terminal disease, the risk-reward ratio for getting involved in research is very different. And I think if we can change the culture and make the NHS a series of specialist centres of excellence where professors like Charlie Craddock and others we've heard from today are empowered and able to work with patients, then we will drive innovative practice, new patient models, new models of patient care, and make Britain the place where this is happening.
In many areas of medicine, not just cancer, but a lot of other diseases, we simply don't have good or effective drugs available. And in that setting, we have to either pioneer new therapies, and that's done through early phase trials, carefully looking at efficacy and toxicity, or we need to formally demonstrate whether the new therapy is as good or better than the standard of care. And that can only be done in the setting of a clinical trial. So for those patients, clinical trials are clearly indicated.
Today I had an email from a Dutch group that's trying to do exactly the same thing as Empower, and I've had contacts from other groups around the developed world who are equally concerned about this. There are groups in America who are worried about the fact that people cannot get access to drugs.
I think we've seen regulations evolve and perhaps they need to be revolutionary rather than evolutionary at the moment because of given the pace of change going on in the science and the pace of change going on amongst the patient community. But I think we can work with supportive people within the regulators to make that change happen.
There is precedent, and we have seen this before. When faced with very significant, if you like, healthcare challenges, the regulator can respond. If you take a situation like HIV, the enormous patient activism, the very significant investment from both public and private, but specifically from the pharmaceutical sector, combined with the very, very significant interest of healthcare providers around the world, what that forced to happen was a real change in regulatory approach, greater early access, rapid access to trials and very broad clinical trials with, if you like, very significant structuring of trials that enable us, I think, to get to a solution to treat people with HIV much quicker. And that was a consequence, I believe, of a flexing of the regulatory structure. It didn't require legislation because often the regulatory structure can be flexible within its current context. I think what we're often referring to very specifically in cases like motor neuron is the issue of benefiting risk, of equating risk with benefit, about how that's looked at in these very difficult intractable diseases, and how do you get patients into phase 2, into meaningful phase 2, and how small numbers of patients, how that data translates to license and use in the healthcare system.
With children is a tremendous desire for people to work together to find answers, and so you found naturally there was clinical trials going on to try and improve the rate of life for children. When it comes to adults, we become a commodity, and we're a financial burden sometimes, and the proof has to be there before the investment comes, and it's what becomes first, the chicken or the egg scenario, sadly.
We have some of the best biosector industry in the world here, producing the drugs, producing the molecules. We've got patients who wish to take the risk of trialling these drugs, and we've got to change the regulatory regime in between. And I think that if we have the Secretary of State involved so that he can start thinking about how we change the culture within the NHS, the domestic law, and then we'll get his department, him and his officials, to talk to the European licensing agency to see what we can do to change that. It would be a huge triumph if we could get this regulatory regime sorted out so that more people with terminal illnesses could get suitable drugs quicker, but I stress under very close medical supervision.
So I have a message from him here today, which I have been asked to read out, and I would like to do so. And he says, thank you for joining us here today. I'm sorry I cannot be with you, but let me assure you that I'm there with you in spirit. As you know, despite the limitations of this illness, I'm commissioned to pushing forward this debate. However, I'm not the one who can change things. It is the people in this room who can make a difference. I am realistic enough to know that any change to the current regulatory environment in this area will likely be too late to have any significant impact on my condition. But this isn't about me. It's about the next generation of patients who deserve the chance to choose how they fight their battles and the risks that they are prepared to take, as long as those risks are taken in a controlled environment under strict guidance of their physician. It is the patients who know most about the conditions they are living with day in and day out. I am overwhelmed by the support of our campaign, and I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to be part of this discussion. Today is the day that we take the campaign onto a new level and hopefully into the statute books. Please consider the protocol and give us your views. Contribute to making proposed change a reality.